I'm Mike Kustudia. I'm the Milltown State Park Manager. I just wanted to give kind of a short little talk. Today, we're here to celebrate the confluence and the idea of restoration, and then kind of all the creatures that have benefit from restoration. So we'll have talks on fisheries and bird life and animal migrations, and so all kinds of stuff. But there's a whole bunch of other stories that just want to kind of touch on briefly without, and then save for another day, basically. This is sort of the kickoff of many talks to come. And for an overall theme, it's this idea of confluence, and when we call this, we have a panel here that's called the Confluence of Stories. And it's been kind of made in reference to earlier today, but so many things come together. The rivers literally come together right there. And this plaza was sited, the key piece in siting this plaza was to be able to see those two rivers coming together. So there's that literal sense for a confluence with rivers, but then also just kind of the more figurative one about a confluence of stories, a confluence of people that came together to restore this place. So, like I said, today the big theme is restoration, and we've got some great speakers lined up. But some of the stories that that we won't be telling today, but we'll be coming back to, are just the ones of the human history here. Tony Inkashola, Salish Elder was kind of touching on some of that. There are thousands of years of human history here. And beginning with the Salish and Pend Oreille people, or the Kalispel people. Beyond that, in much more recent history, but still 200 years ago, Meriwether Lewis passed through here. They were another great state park down the road is Travelers Rest. I'm sure some of you folks have been down there. Meriwether Lewis, on the return journey home, came through here with 9 other crew people and the dog Seaman. We see a few dogs here. So the first dog, probably off leash, I would bet, but came through here with Seaman, the big Newfoundland. I appreciate all the dogs that are on leash. Thank you very much. So yeah, on their way home, they passed through here. The journals of Lewis and Clark, there's a description of this confluence and talked about a wide, muddy river, kind of probably like what we see today. Whether or not that was the exact spot of the confluence, it's probably pretty darn close. Because this has been rebuilt, and they, when they built the dam, there were a lot of photos of it being built, but there are really no images of what the confluence looked like before that happened, before it was dammed. There was a sketch from John Mullen's crew, an artist named Gustav Sahone, and it's on one of these panels. We've got 6 panels in this area. 2 more go on the Blackfoot upriver, but so at any rate, just moving through kind of more recent history with Meriwether Lewis. And then the Mullen, John Mullen was a lieutenant in the Army, and he was tasked with coming up with a military road that connected the upper reaches of the Missouri River at Fort Benton to the upper reaches of the Columbia at Walla Walla. And so that road passed through here. They were camped out right over in Milltown, before Milltown was Milltown, and that was in the early 1860s. It was a winter camp, and it was brutally cold. Folks that have been out here in the wintertime know we get Hellgate winds through here, and it can howl. And John Mullen wrote in his journals that it was an abode of not overmuch comfort, which I just think is classic understatement by a military man, but an abode of not overmuch comfort. So beyond that, that kind of, they were looking for routes for roads and railroads, and those pathways followed basically the indigenous routes that the Salish had known and the Nez Perce had known for thousands of years. There were 2 kind of there's kind of a junction for a trail system. And again, just all these things that come together and the things that move through it. And that's sort of an overarching theme. For the native people, there were trails that followed the Blackfoot, and then the road to the Buffalo headed up the Blackfoot. Or I'm sorry, the Clark Fork and the Blackfoot. after John Mullen, you know, the road came through, and then next was the railroad. And so when the railroad came through in the mid-1880s, 1883, that brought a dramatic change for this region. It began the industrialization of the rivers and the landscape and the forests. The first dam was, the railroad came through in 83. The first dam, I think, was built in 1884. And it was just upstream here on the Blackfoot. And that was the first dam in western Montana. It was also the first dam that blocked the runs of the bull trout. Folks that are, we have David Schmetterling with us today, who's going to talk at length about bull trout. But in the old days, before there were dams on our river system, bull trout would live in Lake Pend Oreille and swim up the Clark Fork and spawn in channels in little streams, you know, as wide as this pathway or this plaza here. Those runs, the first one again was locked in the mid-1880s, and then there was a whole series of dams built after that. So yeah, the industrialization of this area also led to the growth of all these communities that are around here, you know. West Riverside, Bonner, Milltown, Piltsville. I have to highlight, my mom is here, who was born and raised in Piltsville, Barbara, and my dad, Lou. So yeah, a lot of communities grew up around the industrial activity here. So like, you know, we're here celebrating the restoration of these rivers, but that's not to necessarily demonize the past. You know, these communities were working people, and it was what was done at the time, but we came to know that there was considerable consequence to some of these activities. You know, that was recognized in the early 1980s when they discovered that the Milltown Reservoir, or the wells in Milltown had been contaminated with arsenic. And that was, it was some sleuthing done by some geology professors to figure out it was the flood of 1908 that washed the mine waste from the upper region, Butte and Anaconda, into the river system. And it didn't all stop at the dam, but a lot of it did. And it's always interesting. Nature is a character in every story, right? It is today. When the Milltown Dam was built in 1908, it was finished in January. In June of 1908, we saw the flood of record. The biggest flood in recorded history. The second biggest flood we ever saw was this year. It's been an epic year for water here. But still, the one in 1908 was probably twice the amount of water that we saw flowing through here this year. So at any rate, you know, the whole super fun story, we've got David Brooks. He's coming up next to talk about restoring the shining waters. And yeah, so as part of our efforts here at Montana State Parks, we want to capture the history of these places and share them for future generations, and kind of protecting and preserving our natural and human heritage. And so under the banner of kind of a confluence of stories, that's our effort here at Milltown. And we hope to do this. This is kind of, I've been telling stories about Milltown up at the Overlook now for many years. This is the first time I've ever given a talk here, so this is kind of exciting. It's a little rough, and I'm a little ragged from 2 weeks of getting ready for this big shindig, so I hope you bear with me. But yeah, so a confluence of stories is sort of the name of our interpretive program overall. We hope to get these stories out in a variety of means. You know, this is the kind of the mainstream traditional approach is to have interpretive talks. We have lots of interpretive panels in store. We've got half a dozen up at the Overlook. There are 3 here. There's another one down at the end of the trail. If you guys get out for a walk, I'd encourage you to go take a look at that. That was about Riverside Park. This is not the first park that was ever here. Back in 1908, after the dam was built, William A. Clark started a streetcar. And to get people to ride his streetcar, he developed a park out here. And so Riverside Park existed here from 1911 to 1926. And it was more kind of located down there, but they also talked about the lake at Riverside Park, and that was the Milltown Reservoir. So Yeah, I encourage you to get out on the trails, have a look at some of these panels. You know, the first one there, again, is that theme of Confluence of Stories, kind of the big picture of what we're hoping to do. This one talks about an system, as it said, I think. You know, just highlighting the cultural and biological aspects of the bull trout. And then this one takes a quick little look at 100 years in the life of the Milltown Dam. So yeah, interpretive talks, interpretive panels. We also are using digital means to try to tell these stories. If you go to the state parks website, stateparks.mt.gov/Milltown, we have a story map there. And story maps are really cool. They're interactive maps that you can incorporate a lot of historic images and video clips and a lot of text. And so that's another means for kind of telling these stories and interpreting this amazing place. And so again, this is kind of the kickoff for a lot of things to come. I've been working with an AmeriCorps member. I don't think I see her here, Olivia Hollis. She's been a key player in all this, organizing this today, but she's also helping with a lot of the interpretive programming. So that's just a little brief sketch of what we hope to do here. If there are questions, I would love to tackle those. I would also like to highlight another partner of ours, Joanna Yardley's hiding back there behind the beam. She's been our graphic designer on these projects, these interpretive panels for many years. And it's great to have such talented people involved with this. Yeah.
Maybe you covered this before I got here, but what's the story on that cut bank?
So the bluff here, that's yet another story we hope to tell someday with a geologist, which I am not. It's not my strong suit, but as I understand it, some of the rock is Precambrian, you know, so it's 1 billion years old plus, and then the other is igneous that has kind of flowed over it. But again, you know, so that's just the breadth of stories that are here to tell. Start with the geology, really.
What place did that have in rerouting the river here?
So I think it was kind of a pinch, and so this was a logical spot for a dam, and then you had the added benefit if you're a dam builder that you're damming two rivers at once. But, yeah.
Any foreseeable plans for a boat ramp?
That's not a history question. No, so you know there had been a lot of discussion about that. What we have is a hand carry access point. So there's a trail at the end of the parking lot. So anything you can hand carry to the water's edge, you can launch there. You know, part of the deal is we recognize that there's a boat ramp just a mile upstream on the Blackfoot. There's also boat ramps at Tura, and then there's boat ramps down at Sharon. And so this, you know, you're launching a canoe, kayak, tube, even a paddle raft, you know. So close.
So no, there's not plans for a boat ramp.
Not at this time. Yeah. So how are we doing time-wise? We're just a few minutes early. Maybe we'll just segue in. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Confluence of stories.
Yes.
Describe like all the meanings of that.
The meanings, yeah, so the literal and figurative meanings, you know, we have a confluence of two rivers. The confluence of stories just comes from how many people came, in numerous levels, you know, like the history I kind of just raced through, you know, all those stories came through here, and it's kind of shaped by our geography and topography, right? You got 3 mountain ranges, you kind of got the Jocko or Rattlesnake, the Garnet and the Sapphires all come through here, and 2 rivers. So just all the history that has kind of passed through here, you know, just coming together. Confluence comes from a Latin word, confluere, which is to flow together. So yeah, history-wise, we've got them, you know, from the Salish, the native peoples, and the early explorers, the industrialists, and then the story of restoration. But as they were kind of talking about in some of the earlier speeches today, that so many people came together. It was a confluence of all kinds of local residents, confluence of agencies, just all coming together to make this project happen, to take out a dam, to remove some contaminants, and to restore, you know, 2 rivers. Yeah. Any other questions? Yo.
What's next? It sounds like this is a work in progress.
Yeah, so, you know, this is definitely a work in progress, the confluence area here now. You know, there'll be a lot more re-veg work to come. Even this shelter is not finished, as you may have gathered. Shelter shouldn't flood like this one does. We've been trying to pull this together on a wing and a prayer, and we're, you know, we got it open enough for today, but there's more work on this to come. But as far as the park in general, this is just one piece that we're working on now. Probably the next thing on the horizon is our property over on Bandman Flats. So across the river, like if folks have been up to the overlook, as you're heading up there, opposite the shooting range, there's a big grassy meadow. Well, that's part of Bandman Flats. And that's, hi Ann. We hope to develop a trailhead there and a trail across the flats that connects out to the floodplain here. And so, and then as far as what's next from here, you know, this trail down here will continue all the way up to the Milltown, or the Black Bridge in Milltown. That'll be delayed by a couple of years as they're rebuilding the I-90 bridges right now. But, and then from there, you know, Milltown State Park also has land up on the Blackfoot. So right opposite the mill and opposite the new amphitheater there's really a sweet piece. And it's kind of the industrial wildland interface, because you've got the mill and all that on one side, and then you've got the mountains on the other that head into the Rattlesnake and in short time, really. And so we have about 50 acres up there spread out over 3/4 of a mile. We've got work with a private landowner to get access to it. We're separated from it by about 3/4 of a mile as well. But so that's another project in the wings. And you know, the big picture, like this all came out of this redevelopment group, the Milltown Superfund redevelopment group, and that was quite a story in its own right. And but the vision out of that is what we've been working on ever since. And part of that vision, you know, was to develop this, to develop that side, and then to one day maybe connect it with a pedestrian bridge across here. And that would give you connectivity from here all the way up the Bitterroot, basically, because then you'd be connecting through the tunnel, through Bandman Flats, to Kim Williams, and then beyond. And then trails go that way as well. You'd cross the Black Bridge in Milltown, and there's 7 miles of trail that head out to Tortura. So this is a work in progress, the confluence area itself, as well as the whole park overall, but a lot of great things still to come. All right. No, thanks. Yeah, thanks. So our next speaker is David Brooks. David, is he here? Yes, he is. There he is. David is the executive director of Montana Trout Unlimited. He's quite an outdoors person, loves rafting and rivers, and he was a student at University of Montana working on a PhD in history, and he looked at the story of the Milltown Superfund site and has turned that into a book called Restoring the Shining Waters. And so I'll turn it over to David.
So let me start with this. I think that the people in the local communities here, Milltown, Bonner, up and down this area, who opposed the removal of the Milltown Dam are largely responsible for us being here today, so celebrating this new park. You know, as Mike kind of alluded to, when that dam was first built over here in 1908, it was literally the powerhouse for what was industrial timber industry here in this area, had been for decades and would continue to be. And even by the 1980s, 90s, into the 2000s, when dam removal became an option here, the timber industry had this long, important place in the community. And so people who saw that going away literally saw the engine of their long-term economy being ripped out. And so what they were advocating for was, if that dam goes away, what becomes of this community? What becomes of the economic community here, the culture, the history, the social network that had depended on and thrived around the timber industry? My point is that, as you've heard today, a lot of different voices, a lot of different people, a lot of different concerns led to what we have here today. And that included the diversity of oppositional voices, people bringing different ideas to what should happen here. And the end result was what is now really the watermark of Superfund cleanup and how that law is applied. Back in 1980, when the Superfund law was first passed, the idea was to contain toxic waste sites, get people away from them, protect human health. By the time this all unfolded, and largely because of this site, Superfund became being about remediation, taking away toxic waste, restoration, trying to restore or put back natural systems like this so that they function naturally, and redevelopment, taking care of the community, giving the community a future in a point that had been designated as a toxic waste site. And that's what the opponents for dam removal in the end were advocating for, is keeping a place for the community and their economic system and their way of life in place. And that's what hopefully this site is helping to do. I guess my point is that it took a lot of voices, and it took diverse voices and even competing voices over a long amount of time in conversation with each other. And I think maybe that's what we mean also by confluence, that metaphor of confluence, is lots of different voices coming together for the outcome that we've had. I want to tell a few other stories that illustrate that point, and there are many. From the very beginning, when Superfund law was passed in 1980 and was administered by the Environmental Protection Agency, that did not mean that the EPA came, scouring the United States looking for toxic sites to clean up. Far from it. Here at Milltown, what happened, and the way that first became designated as a Superfund site, and as our EPA person pointed out, the blue tower over there is their new water system, was that local individuals in Milltown called up the county health department complaining about their water. Their water was staining their clothes when they washed them, staining the porcelain in sinks and toilets, perhaps killing vegetables in their gardens when they watered them. The health department came out and tested the water, finally, for more than just bacteria and nutrients, but also for metals, and found levels of things like arsenic that far exceeded the drinking standards at the time by 10, 50-fold in different households. And so that is what first put the problem on the radar beyond just the local communities to the county and the health department. But even that did not get them listed as a Superfund site. Again, the EPA doesn't go out and make this happen. Individuals made it happen. In particular, and one of the stories I really like is that at the time there was a woman working for, Peter, was she working for the city or the county, who helped apply for Superfund status?
Well, that would have been the county health officer, Elaine Dill, and the county commissioner, Anne Marie DeSole.
So Elaine, I believe I have it right, she had moved here from a job that she quit with the EPA, largely because of her dissatisfaction of what was happening with the EPA in some of its early years. Under the Reagan administration was not a super fan of Superfund site. In fact, the name Superfund was meant to be derogatory to sort of call it a bloated budget. And so, as apparently sometimes happens with administrations, if you don't like a law and can't get rid of it, you underfund it, and so that it works poorly, and then you point at it and say, see, that's not working well, we should get rid of it. These things apparently happen. It was happening with Superfund at the time. Elaine left that job, was in Missoula. She knew how to navigate the process of getting a site designated on the Superfund list, the national priorities list. And so again, it wasn't this big agency making it happen. It was the agency of individuals making these things happen. In a similar story that Mike told a little bit about, you know, the problem was arsenic in wells and in drinking water in Milltown, but nobody knew for sure where that was coming from. And it was a couple of university professors in the geology department who, on their own, came out with a couple of grad students in the middle of winter for 25 bucks, rented a chainsaw, skied out onto the snow-covered reservoir here, started hacking holes in the ice, and using a big long extendable pole like this on the microphone here to grab samples of sediment, because they thought maybe it's the sediment in the bottom of the reservoir that's transporting arsenic into the groundwater. And they were right. They went on to help do things like show that it was the same sediment that had come from upstream from the banks of Silverbow Creek and from Warm Springs in the Anaconda area that had been washed down in the 1908 flood and settled behind the dam that were causing the problem. Again, the point is agency of individuals, people doing their jobs, people being concerned and caring about what was going on that helped make happen here what happened. Forward ahead, I think one of the other reasons that we have the solution we've had here and pushed Superfund in the direction it's gone is because the concern for the sediment and the problem here expanded geographically as well. Peter, who's back here, if I start telling Peter Nielsen stories, we'll be here all day, because he's somebody who has had his hand in this from the beginning and in every aspect of it. But by 1996, in the winter, there was an ice flow event happening on the Blackfoot. Huge chunks of ice were coming down the Blackfoot as it was breaking up, and this was on the radio. And Peter, because he's curious about all these things and interested, came driving up here to check out the ice flow. Well, he saw that flowing over the dam was a bunch of discolored water, because to prevent the ice from smashing the top of the dam out, dam operators lowered the pool so that the ice would hit lower down and more solid parts of the dam. Well, that let a bunch of water and sediment from the reservoir out. Peter noticed how discolored it was. As a good health department water quality specialist, he had beakers or test tubes or containers with him, and so he comes out and of course scoops up some water, later takes it back, has it tested. Sure enough, it's full of metals, including arsenic and other things that were both a human health risk and a risk to the fishery. Following that event, people were reporting fish kills downriver, and what happened because of Peter's efforts, because of people's interest in the fishery and watching fish die because of the spill of water that had to happen to preserve the dam, is that people in Missoula started worrying about health risks. People downriver, even beyond Missoula, worried about it. People in Missoula and beyond began really caring about how was this affecting the fishery beyond just this site. And 1996 happened to be an interesting year for that, because Robert Redford's film version of A River Runs Through It comes out. There's unbelievably increased attention to trout fishing and our trout waters here, and so that confluence of events really spread the geography and diversified the interest in what was going on here at Milltown and this Superfund site. In a similar story, a few years later, and I certainly don't want to steal David Schmetterling's thunder because he's going to talk next about bull trout, but David Schmetterling started studying the migration of fish and how this dam was or was not influencing that, particularly trout, particularly our native trout, West Slope cutthroat trout, and bull trout. The prevailing wisdom at the time was that this dam had been in place for almost 100 years. Certainly fish with their little pea-sized brains were no longer trying to migrate back up past a dam and find their home spawning waters where they had spawned and then gone over the dam but couldn't get back up. You know, they wouldn't remember their evolutionary history and that they needed to get back up and spawn in those waters. Well, in short, David changed our thinking about that. He found that fish were piling up by the tens and hundreds of thousands every year below the dam, trying to make it back up river. including West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout. He started tagging some of those, letting them go, and sure enough found that they moved up into the Clark Fork to places like Rock Creek to spawn. Even more so, they moved up the Blackfoot into the tributaries of the Blackfoot. He did this cool program where kids in schools adopted these trouts that had the radio tags in them, named them, started following their movements, and I hope he will tell his story of in particular, the fish named pollywog that met an untimely death as it was being tracked. And I'll save that for David, but the point is that it got this whole other group of people interested in the effects of the dam and the reservoir. Not just people downstream where water was flowing, sediment was flowing, toxins were flowing, but people upstream who realized that dam and the gauntlet of the reservoir was preventing the health or better health of the fisheries up the Blackfoot and up the Clark Fork. And so again, an expansion of interest, an expansion of the geography of interest, moved the process along, made more people care about the fate of what happened here, and certainly increased support for dam removal. By the late 90s, and I think when Dave was doing that study, it was 98, he started into the early 2000s, the conversation about dam removal had really started. It was not a given that that dam was going to come out. In fact, it was 20 years after the designation of this site as a Superfund site before it was really on the radar. I've got a friend who is a long-term fishing guide here, John Herzer, who many of you may know, who once said, you know, before the late 90s, talking about removing the Milltown Dam would have been like talking about digging up Mount Jumbo so that the rattlesnake can get more morning light. You know, it was just not on anybody's radar, and it would have seemed absurd. But it was all these different stories, different efforts by people that began motivating us in that direction. I want to finish by reading one small short story, because I think it really captures all of this. And unfortunately, I don't think Tracy Stone Manning is here anymore, but Tracy, for a long time, was the face of the campaign of remove the dam, restore the river, and helped spread that message, helped keep a focus on the concerns about toxins and what needed to be done here, but also added a sense of enthusiasm and even maybe fun to the campaign to remove the dam. And so in credit to her and the work of the Clark Fork Coalition and all the many people who were part of that, let me just read this short bit about one example of that enthusiasm. At the time when really removing the dam, I would say, probably became the prevailing view and was the alternative that we all realized would eventually happen. It came from the community, Stone Manning remembered, about the origins of some aspects of the campaign. Her favorite was from a Clark Fork Coalition member who spotted her in a grocery store where he walked up to her and said, "You know what we need? We need a big flotilla from the dam into Missoula." "We totally need a big flotilla from the dam into Missoula," she responded. So the coalition advertised the first Milltown to downtown float in support of removing the dam. Well, they attempted to organize it anyway. Clark Fork Coalition staff rounded up about 15 friends who had boats to accommodate the dozens of people Stone Manning expected to show up. By the time temperatures were peaking, more than 150 craft and an estimated 500 or more people were on the water, which didn't include the scores of dogs. It was crazy. It still makes my eyes water, confessed Stone Manning. She recognized only a fraction of the people there, and she thought, who are these people? And I love them. It was, according to her, not those environmentalists from Missoula. It was grandmas, babies, and frat boys. It was a very cool expression of people saying, this is what we want. Some wanted dam removal because of fish or drinking water concerns, others so they could recreate more safely, and some because of the economics of recreation. As Stone Manning's craft cruised into Missoula, she looked up at one of the bridges and saw John Wardell, the EPA's state director, with a big grin on his face. She knew that he saw the same thing she did, overwhelming public support for his agency's option of removing the dam. As the Missoulian newspaper reported, the only opposition present was a riverside sign imploring, "Keep the dam, kill the hippies." The second annual Milltown to Downtown event drew nearly 3,000 people. More importantly, the EPA received an estimated 10,000 public comments about the Milltown decision. It was this flood of public comment that helped sway the EPA. That last part to me is what I'm really driving at, is that it wasn't the EPA, not that there weren't a lot of great people like Diana Hammer working on this, but it was people that swayed the EPA, individuals. You know, in researching and writing this book about all of what happened here, I was really struck when I started going through the records and seeing these 10,000 letters and postcards and just all those names of people who did a little something at least. And that to me is the story of how big change happens, is lots of people doing at least something little. And so I think, you know, when I think about this story, this place, what we're doing here celebrating, there are a couple takeaway messages to me. One is that this helped change Superfund. It went from being contain toxins, get people away from them, to, as I described, what are now known as the 3 R's of Superfund: remediate, restore, and redevelopment. And that hasn't just been for here. That's been the model, what Superfund is aiming for other communities. It's been an inspiration. I mean, what we have here is inspiring other communities across the country to try to do better by their what are now toxic, poisonous sites. And so I think that's a real accomplishment beyond just us being able to come down here and walk the trails and be here, is that we've inspired other communities and are making other places better. Even on the bigger picture, this was part of changing the environmental community, the conservation community's view nationwide of what our job is. It's not just conserving resources, preserving pretty places, but we now feel a responsibility to help do restoration, to fix places that we've messed up. It's not just enough to preserve some places that aren't so messed up. We have to go fix. We got to clean up the places that we have had an impact on and that can be cleaned up. And then to return to the point that I started out with by mentioning the opposition here being part of redevelopment, I think the big so what of all this is simply the fact that diverse voices coming together over the long term is what brings us really great solutions. And with that, I'd be happy to hear your diverse thoughts, ideas, questions about any of this, the whole history of this, your story of it. All right, well, there are lots of great stories here about this place, and hopefully Mike's going to help us tell more of them over the course of time. Yep. Thanks a lot.
So yeah, I'm happy to introduce a colleague here. This is the grand opening of the Confluence area on June 23rd, 2008, 18. Yeah, we have David Schmetterling with us. He's a research biologist with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and David has probably close to 20 years or then some studying fisheries at the Milltown area. He's going to talk about bull trout and just fisheries recovery with the river restoration.
Thanks, Mike.
You bet, David.
Yeah, this is obviously a really fantastic day and one that definitely deserves celebration. I've been studying fish at Milltown, in the Milltown area, no longer dam here, primarily between 1996 and 2014. So most of my career, I spent studying the effects that the dam was having on fish, and then later ways the effects that the dam removal could possibly have on fish, and ultimately the recovery. So I've handled a lot of fish out here. I've studied them intimately for a long time. But the bigger, more important thing that I want to impress upon people is just the story of this dam and this dam's removal. It wasn't very long ago that the idea of removing this dam was impossible. wasn't even discussed, it just was never going to happen. And there was no reason to study fish here, for example. And that was the prevailing wisdom at the time. Shortly thereafter, sentiment changed. And then the idea of dam removal and restoration of the site went from being impossible to very controversial, even split the community. It was really a contentious idea because it was change that was going to occur. The dam's gone. You can't even see where it was. I was even remarking earlier, there maybe should be a plaque where it was. And I know giving lectures at the universities in Montana, a lot of people never even knew a dam was here. And all that happened in a really short amount of time, something that went from being impossible to being completed in a brief amount of time. And it was the right thing to do. And regardless of how long the whole process took, is irrelevant. We now have a connected watershed once again, where a lot of animal species can thrive, not pitting winners and losers, designing engineering solutions to a dam, but allowing the system to recover. So that's really, I mean, I could just end it there. I mean, I think that's really the bigger issue with fish in the area, and what this project represents. But I will tell you more. I will talk about bull trout because, as conveniently as this says, this confluence area right behind me it was called, for millennia, the place of bull trout in Salish. And I won't say the Salish word because I can't. I don't do a horrible justice to that. And that's pretty amazing that this is called the place of bull trout. And if folks know, downstream in Missoula, the confluence with the Rattlesnake Creek, does anybody know what that name was in Salish? The place of little bull trout. And this is the place of the big bull trout. And those place names are really significant. And it's true, so the biggest bull trout in the region, possibly left in Montana, are probably right here right now at this confluence. And those are probably headed up to the North Fork of the Blackfoot ultimately. So they're probably right along this bank right here. And I'll talk about that. But you've heard me mention confluence a number of times, and I know Mike Kustudia and some of the other speakers talked about this, the notion of this as being a confluence. And that's really appropriate time to talk about bull trout too. The Latin binomial, or the scientific name for bull trout, is Salvelinus confluensis, which means confluence, trout of the confluence. Or char, actually, is what they are. They're a member of the char family. And this is the southernmost, or nearly the southernmost extent of their range. Historically, they went as far south as Northern California, but they've been extinct from California for some time. There's one southern population in northern Nevada, in the Jarbidge drainage, that's hanging on. But Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, that's the southern extent of their range. They occur in Canada further north of here. And like many animals we have in Montana that are occupying the southern extent of the range, they're really imperiled. And throughout their range in Montana, on the west side of the Continental Divide, they're facing really tough times. The things that affect bull trout affect other species as well, and they're really suffering from things like fragmented habitat, like the dam caused here, habitat loss, climate change. Since they're sort of at the southern end of their climate, they're most susceptible to changes. Their habitat is really shrinking, the places where they can live. Other things across the landscape have really affected bull trout. Competition with non-native fish, hybridization with other non-native fish. Historically, there was overharvest of them, and really a lack of an appreciation for that fish. Most of that illegal harvest and those pressures have been released, but they still face a really tough time for recovery. And truly, it's projects like the dam removal here that are a way to ensure that they're still going to be on this landscape, hopefully for hundreds of years, if not longer. A dam removal like this affects a huge geographic area when you talk about a connected network of streams and rivers. It's the size, scale, and permanence of a project that other restoration projects really lack. Because this doesn't just affect, the dam spanned maybe 100 yards of the riverbank here, but it affects hundreds of miles of the watershed. And that's the scale we need to think about to ensure species recover. The name is obviously the place of big bull trout, and I think that's really encouraging. So many places you see names of, driving around Missoula or other communities, you see streets and areas named after what was there. You'll drive up Bitterroot Lane and see a subdivision, a place where Bitterroots used to be, or Pronghorn Subdivision, where antelope were once. And I think it's really encouraging that we, can still call this a place of big bull trout. And hopefully with the dam's removal, it'll ensure that that's not just something that was once here. But, only time will tell. So going back to the dam and talking about the future, in 1907, the dam was closed on the river here. It went into operation. And in an instant, it really changed the entire Upper Clark Fork watershed for the worse for fish. And for about 100 years, the impacts on fish in the Blackfoot and Clark Fork rivers persisted, and they were unchanged. And no animal felt those changes more than bull trout. And one of the reasons is fish in this area, for fish all over Montana, but in this area, have adapted over millennia to take advantage of the seasonal changes we have. And everybody knows the seasonal changes that occur around here. And they could use different areas over a big, over this watershed, or even a much larger connected watershed for different times of their lives, for different things. Bull trout will spawn in streams that are really cold. You probably heard also really clean and really clear. Clean and clear some of the year, in the summertime and into the fall. They're protected habitats. And it's the same kind of thing that a lot of other trout do, like our native West Slope cutthroat trout. They'll spawn in small streams where they're protected from a lot of things, protected from predators, other fish, or other animals. But they can't complete their whole lives in there. At least the migratory ones can't. And that's what they need these other habitats for. So the bull trout, I've been gesturing, that might be down here. They may spawn and the young rear in tributary streams, say to the Blackfoot. And the young will rear there for up to about 4 years, which is a long time for fish that express their life histories this way. And during those 4 years, they become very acquainted with that rearing habitat. We call it imprinting. So they develop a memory of the smells and the senses and even just the physical locations in that area. So spend 4 years there, but then they have the luxury, or historically had the luxury, to move downstream into areas that are warmer and more productive, like the Clark Fork River, historically Lake Pend Oreille. And that's where they could grow bigger and mature, and then return to those same places where they hatched in order to spawn. When I say bull trout were most affected by a thing like Milltown Dam, it's because they spent those years, 4, even 5 years in some cases, in tributaries. So they return to those same places where they spawn with an incredibly high, what we call fidelity. They go back to those same places and almost 95 or greater % fidelity. I mean, they don't go anyplace else. They'll attempt to return to those places to spawn themselves. Just like with Pacific salmon. I think most people know the story of Pacific salmon. But our native trout and do the same thing here as well. And the reason they do that is quite simply because it worked for them. Whatever unique combinations of things happened in that tributary stream that allowed them to survive, to maturing in rivers that allowed them to grow, they just do the same thing. There's a strong pressure toward that. So when a dam gets built, like Milltown was in 1907, that blocked all upriver migrations of not just bull trout, but everything that was in the river and everything that evolved over millennia to take advantage of this big watershed. So it wasn't just bull trout, wasn't just cutthroat trout, but it was our sucker species, our 2 native sucker species. They perform really extensive migrations too, for the same reasons. They all evolved in the same habitats. Everything that's in the river performs migrations. The dam blocked that. The dam not only blocked upriver migrations, but it limited the downstream movement of fish. And this is kind of counterintuitive because there's water below the dam, so you figure fish can get below the dam. But apart from when the dam was spilling, which is just a brief time in the spring, like this time of the year, fish would have to go through the turbines in order to get downstream of the dam.
Ouch.
Well, which is actually, if you're small enough, it's fine. Fish smaller than 7 or 8 inches, they could survive 90%, 95% time. But if you were bigger than that, bigger than 8 inches, you just physically couldn't get through the turbines, which is probably good because they would have gotten chopped up if they're bigger. So there's a lot of, it really impeded downstream movements. The reservoir, as people have talked about today, contained sediments that represented a legacy of hard rock mining upstream in Butte and Anaconda. Hard rock mining and smelting operations in Anaconda. And having all that sediment laden with these toxins, the confluence of these 2 rivers, what would happen was fish downstream would be chronically impaired by a steady, slow release. But then periodically, it was really almost every 10 years, we'd have ice jams that would scour some of those deeper sediments and release larger quantities of those metals. And then we'd have acute impacts. We'd have fish kills. So fish were both chronically impaired, their fitness was less, their condition was poor, and then on top of that, you'd have these acute impacts where you'd have kills. So upstream passage, downstream passage, sediments, and then in the mid-90s, late 90s, the reservoir, which was actually right where we're standing. This is actually a spot where we used to call the picnic slough, and this was there was a picnic area right up there, and this was a big bay. It was kind of an eddy, if you can imagine the Blackfoot coming down here and hitting the dam and spinning around. This was one of the best spawning and rearing habitats for northern pike in the whole system. They weren't introduced into Milltown Reservoir. They were actually introduced into the Clearwater chain of lakes in the late 1980s, mid-1980s. And then through a series of events, they eventually came down and established here because this represented perfect spawning and rearing habitat for northern pike. They're a lake fish, and this should be a river, and it is again. But this was really lake habitat.
On the pike, were they introduced illegally or
Yeah,
intentionally?
illegally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like I said, they were illegally introduced into the Clearwater lakes. They became established in Milltown Reservoir, and they thrived here. They thrived. Well, I'll explain that in a minute. But because there was such good spawning and rearing habitat here that isn't present in the rivers around. They provided fish to the Clark Fork River below. After they got established in Milltown Reservoir in the late 1990s, we were able to quantify or estimate their abundance in the river all the way down to Superior. And one of the reasons they thrived here is because of the location at the confluence of these 2 rivers. And going back to talking about the bull trout and their life history strategies of spawning and rearing in streams and then the young moving downstream. Well, for 100 years, fish had to, deal with this dam. It's not as though the rivers upstream were fishless, but fish had to complete their whole life cycle above the dam. Yet every year, fish were still trying to do that same thing of moving downstream to mature, and they were still doing that. The problem is when they tried to return, they would get blocked by the dam. So one of the reasons the pike thrived here so much is they were just getting a steady diet of fish moving out of these rivers to mature. And it actually was in this very spot here where we started capturing a lot of bull trout in the stomachs of pike in the reservoir. And that's where we really found there was a problem. We caught more bull trout in pike's stomachs than we did in any other way. So all of these things, that I've been describing are things that I started studying in 1996. While I was studying other species at first, the dam kept coming back as having a continued impact on bull trout and west slope cutthroat trout. So in 1998, I proposed a project along with Dave McAvoy, who was a graduate student at the time working on a project with large-scale suckers, to study the effects of the dam and what the dam was still having on fish in the area. There was, despite the fact there's a university just over the hill there, very, very few people studied the dam and fish or anything like that. And I think one of the reasons is it just seemed like such a hopeless situation. Nothing was going to be done. You couldn't do anything about it. And those were, that was actually some of the literal criticism of our proposal. Why are you studying the dam? Why do you want to study the dam? It's going to be there forever. There's nothing you can do about it. And by the way, people would say, the dam's been there 100 years. Whatever impacts it's had, and life has kind of moved on. There's nothing you can do. So the first year of our project, we were trying to just figure out how many fish are affected by this dam, and just starting with the upstream migrations, because that's the easiest thing to look at on paper anyway. Just knowing that the dam was 30 feet high and fish can't jump that high. We know it was a barrier to their upstream movements. But the question was, are fish still being affected by the dam after a century of this strong selective pressure against these migrations? And what we quickly found out in that first year, after capturing about 40,000 fish on upriver migrations, was it was affecting a lot of fish. And that was just using a fish trap at the dam. Every year we would capture about 50,000 individual fish on their upriver migrations. Those migrations were primarily for spawning, and it was every species in the river. And that only represented a fraction of what was there. Through some later work, I was able to estimate the efficiency of our ability to capture fish, and the efficiency was about 25%. So what that told us was there's a couple of 100,000 fish every year impeded by the dam. And because many of those fish, like bull trout, have such a strong fidelity to those natal streams where they came from, they wouldn't just hit the dam and turn around and spawn someplace else. They would attempt passage at the dam through the whole spawning period, or even until they died. So you might be thinking, well, that's really depressing. That's sad. That this is going on. But to me, it represented an opportunity, and there was actually a lot of hope, because the pieces were still here. Fish were still responding to the system in this watershed as though it were connected, even though it wasn't anymore. And that gave me hope that if we could provide fish passage in some capacity, we could make that connection again, and we could benefit a lot of species. And that line right there I just used was almost verbatim from a newspaper article in about 98 or 99, and it drew the ire of a lot of different people. It sounds like a very benign and innocuous statement now. I mean, everybody will say that. Of course, you get fish passage, it's great. But that really threatened a lot of people, and threatened or just sort of introduced the idea that things can change. And going back to what I said in the beginning, I mean, that's the biggest thing from this project, that what went from being impossible to controversial is now complete. And like I said, hopefully this can be a place of bull trout. So one of the neat things out here right now, and I believe Tony Insacola talked about this, was that this is really the timing when bull trout are moving right now. And this is the time of the year when they're going to be literally right here. Bull trout time their migrations as the rivers start to warm up. And in a day like this, you might be thinking maybe they're not quite ready to go, but the rivers have been, they'll time their migrations as the rivers start to decline in the flows, and that raises the temperatures. And that's what triggers them to go. Other fish do it differently. The reason why they're leaving at this point is because the river will eventually get inhospitable to them. It gets too warm, especially now. But even historically, it would get fairly warm. but that's the great place to grow and provide great habitat in the wintertime. So they'll move upriver, and these migrations might be 100 or 200 miles. And like I've mentioned before, they originally used to come out of Lake Pend Oreille. And then they'll spend the summers in tributaries like the North Fork of the Blackfoot, and spend the summers up there, cool water, and then ultimately spawn once the temperatures start to cool down. So it's another trigger for them. And then they'll return back to these places or even farther downstream. So, like I mentioned, it might have sounded really sad and depressing, and especially with bull trout. The individual fish would stay at the dam for a month trying to attempt passage. Many of them would die because they're trying to get out of the river because it's too warm, but they would literally throw themselves at the concrete facade every day. And it's really remarkable that after 100 years of selection against migration, long migrations, that fish were still doing this. So that's why, to me, it was really encouraging. It's not as though anything had gone extinct. The pieces were still there. So with bull trout, especially, they're facing really tough times. But with this dam gone, with access to tributaries and to cooler water and to their natal streams, once again, I'm optimistic that they're still going to be on the landscape, and this place will still be the place of big bull trout, and not like that Bitterroot Lane or Antelope subdivision describing things that were historically there. And more than anything, I think it's so important to remember that what might seem impossible can happen, and especially when there's a good reason for change and good data to suggest the benefits and the promise. So, be happy to answer any questions about bull trout. There seems like there's a lot of people now, but.
Average lifespan of a bull trout?
Yeah, that's a good question. Typical. So I'm going to give you a really long answer because I've got time. Got all day, really. Like I mentioned, I primarily focused on like migratory bull trout that are here, and they'll first spawn, anywhere from 5 to 7 years old. Okay, so that's when they hit maturity, and then they might live as long as 12, 14, 18 years, I think is kind of the oldest. But in this area, I would say between 7 and 9 years is an older bull trout.
Have you got any numbers in the spawning trips in the Blackfoot that would indicate success thus far?
Yes, that's a great question. It's almost as though I planted it, but I didn't. Yeah. So before the dam came out, I did a lot of work to understand what populations were being affected, where these fish belonged, and what populations would be the recipients of fish if dam removal were to occur or fish passage were to occur. And the two, and after transport upstream of Milltown Dam, I could say for bull trout, the most likely sources were the North Fork of the Blackfoot, Montour, and then other streams in the watershed. Not too many though. Primarily, the upstream destination for most bull trout is Montour and the North Fork. And so if you looked at before the dam came out, unfortunately, the trends in most of the spawning streams for bull trout was they were either stable or they were decreasing. Okay. Since the dam was removed, actually in 2003, I estimated that if there was effective fish passage, that the population numbers would increase by 20%, or actually the red numbers. The spawning nests would increase by 20% in those streams. And it turns out that was right. Like math works, note for folks. So in North Fork and Montour, since the dam came out, the trends in those streams are on a different trajectory. They're increasing despite regional stability or declines. So it's hopeful. One of the real challenges with bull trout is because they're a piscivore, they eat other fish. not as charismatic as like grizzlies or things like that, but they're, top level predators, people say. So even when they're that you have a robust population, they're fairly rare, especially across a landscape. You just don't have as many of them as you have, other animals. So they're difficult to monitor. And the way we monitor them primarily is by counting the number of spawning nests, what are called reds. And that's the best way, because they are distributed across a landscape. You can't just look at one little length of stream and figure out how many bull trout there are, because the population, fish that spawn in the North Fork, are going to be, going to spend the year from basically, Ovando to Superior. They're really spread across. So when they congregate and spawn is a good time to count them. Other indices we have for them are also showing, positive trends since dam removal, but a lot of that's anecdotal, just because there's not that many of them. One of the most encouraging things after the dam was removed, so between 2009 and 2014, when I was still monitoring these sections of river, is we started to pick up juvenile bull trout in all of our river sections. When the dam was here, the reservoir was here, teeming with northern pike, we wouldn't see any of those little 9-inch, 8-inch, cigar-shaped bull trout, bite-sized northern pike morsels in the river downstream. But when the reservoir was removed in 2006, and ultimately the dam came out, we started to see those again. So that's encouraging, but anecdotal.
So they had, while the dam was here, they had the dual threat with the northern pike and the dam was removed. So,
And the sediments in the reservoir.
what of the northern pike? Have they just migrated down? Or?
Yeah, so I didn't go into this, but immediately when northern pike were found here, I started exploring ways to reduce the number of pike that were in the reservoir and reduce the effect they were having on West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout. And we did that effectively through summertime drawdowns of the reservoir that would strand and kill young of the year pike, the ones that had just spawned, and then also during the springtime doing adult removals with trap netting. So again, almost this was another great spot, the picnic slough, where we ran trap nets out here. During a 14-month period, we were able to reduce the density of pike by 88% in the reservoir through intensive management by doing all those different things, and we were able to maintain that population size of pike below this threshold where we saw an effect on bull trout and cutthroat trout. And you could do that, and this is kind of one of the things that factored into ultimately to the expense of dam removal or keeping the dam, was all the different management actions you had to provide. You could do that, but forever for northern pike. And you could also provide upstream passage, you could also provide downstream passage, you could deal with all these things. Dam removal did them much better. So northern pike, so now that they're gone, or now that the dam's gone, there's no recruitment to the river below, and the densities of northern pike in the river, as well as downstream here, are really low. They're not gone, So when the dam and the reservoir was here, kind of back in the heyday, in the early 2000s, late 1990s, we estimated there were about 70 adult northern pike per kilometer downstream of the dam. And to get that estimate, we would handle between 100 and 140 pike in this river section below here. But after 2006, there were too few northern pike to handle to get an estimate in that section of river. They're still there, and they're always going to be there because the source is up in the Clearwater. But the last time we electrofished this section and did estimates, I think we handled 1 or 2 pike. So it's nothing like it was. And then and the same thing further down. It's a good, so what happened to them? They probably just kept going downstream to Thompson Falls Reservoir, Idaho, I don't know. But by removing the habitat here, by removing the reservoir, you remove the source of them.
They probably still hang around sloughs, or
when
the water gets warm, they tend to thrive a little bit more.
Well, and they're going to be in very predictable habitats in the Clark Fork. One of the best places for them around here is just downstream of the Frenchtown Mill, where there's a lot of sloughs and that kind of thing. But,
Do wolves or grizzly bears ever come through this area?
historically, they did. Jamie Jonkel, I just saw him, is going to be talking about wildlife through this corridor at 3 o'clock. But yeah, grizzlies are in the area. Certainly, there was. This is an unfortunate story, but just over in Johnson Creek, just right over that hill there, there was one unfortunately mistaken for a black bear and killed last year or 2 years ago. So I mean, we're not talking Bob Marshall Wilderness. We're just talking a few miles away as a crow flies. So yeah, this is a very important corridor, not just for people, but for wildlife.
Wolves? Any evidence?
Oh, yeah, I mean, like right now or?
At any time?
Oh, historically, certainly, yeah.
Not present, they don't have no signs of.
Well, there are wolf packs all around the area. Yeah. You could talk to Jamie about that. Yeah, he's the wildlife biologist in the area. Focus
Is
on the
there
fish.
any grayling in this water here?
No, they're not. They're in the upper Missouri River drainage. So the Big Hole is really the only river-dwelling grayling population we still have. But they were above the falls of the Missouri and all those and some of the larger tributaries historically. Yeah, but yeah, they're not. They were never on this side of the divide. Yeah.
So is the reason why the bull trout population in Montana overall is decreasing, is it because of the warming of the stream?
Yeah, there are all those reasons. Habitat loss, and habitat loss spans a lot of different things. It can be from dam construction where you literally lose stream habitat. It can be from other land management things. Logging historically was a big source of habitat loss for bull trout, where the streams were no longer suitable to them. It's not like the stream was gone, but it wasn't that their habitat was lost. Hard rock mining has affected them. Road construction, any barriers in the landscape. If like I mentioned, they evolved to use the entire watershed. So barriers that come up in the landscape are really deleterious to them. And declines in water quality, and that can be from temperature, that can be from nutrient loading. All those things conspire, and then also non-native fish. Everything from lake trout that you've probably been hearing a lot about in some of our western lakes now, where they eat young bull trout, to hybridization with brook trout in some places, and then general competition with other fish as well, or things like northern pike. Yeah.
So do the bull trout, will they spawn in the lower creeks down here? Do they all under those?
Well, the closest, there are some streams near here where bull trout spawn. Rattlesnake Creek, not fish that are coming up this way, but Rattlesnake Creek is historically a bull trout stream. A little farther up the Blackfoot, Gold Creek was historically a bull trout stream, but those populations are fewer now. In Gold Creek, for example, there are very, very few bull trout in that stream anymore, for all the reasons we've mentioned, as well as Milltown Dam. I mean, that exerted such a strong selective pressure on those fish more than others, because Gold Creek was only 12 miles up here. So every year, probably a huge portion of fish coming out of Gold Creek went downstream over Milltown Dam, to the point that after 100 years or 12 generations of fish, there are very, very few that were still doing that. But on the other side of that is, climate change is affecting these lower elevation streams, more substantially than some of the higher ones in the watershed. So if you look at, the reason, so most of the bull trout streams in this area, in this kind of immediate area here, are going to be in glacially carved valleys with a lot of big cobble, large gravel substrate, and groundwater exchange. So you look at all those valleys that flow south, they're on the north side of the river, so like Rattlesnake Creek, Gold Creek, Belmont, Cottonwood, Montour, and the North Fork. If you can kind of picture all those. Those are all the historical bull trout streams. And then as you go upstream, I mean, with these lower elevation streams, they're going to be the ones that are going to be less suitable for bull trout. And that's why the North Fork, for example, is doing so well.
Before Grant Creek could ever be restored with something resembling a normal channel, is there any possibility that bull trout would be able to use that for?
Yeah, I don't know. Grant Creek has bull trout in it. I'm not. I personally, I haven't sampled Grant Creek in 20-something years, but there were bull trout, brook trout hybrids in there. The downstream portions of Grant Creek are heavily altered. Historically, when it came out on the into the Missoula Valley, it probably went dry seasonally, which is fine for fish like bull trout and West Slope cutthroat trout, because this is the time of the year they move and they take advantage of this high water to go places. But it's been so altered for so long. I don't know what potential is left there, and I don't know enough about the temperatures in Grant Creek to know how much suitable habitat there is either. But it would be a tough one. It's possible, and maybe a species like cutthroat trout might be a better goal for Grant Creek.
Is there any difference in the temperature of the water coming through here now than there was when there was a lake?
Oh, when the dam was here? No, not really. And this is like one of the big. There are a lot of misconceptions with Milltown Dam. This year, it was like clockwork. I was expecting to hear of, well, there wouldn't be any flooding in Missoula if the dam was still there, But the dam didn't provide. There was no storage capacity of the reservoir, so as a result, water coming into the dam was basically felt out downstream. So same thing with water temperature. There wasn't much retention time in the reservoir for the water to warm up significantly. Right where we're standing now in this bay here, it was fairly warm and much warmer than the river channel, but it wouldn't appreciably warm up the Clark Fork downstream of here. Yeah, and then the other thing, just geologically, this is a gaining reach downstream too. So that's a losing reach up there where water goes into enters the kind of groundwater, the hyporheic zone, and then will reemerge downstream, so it'll be actually cooler downstream. So there really wasn't an effect. So the short answer is no, it wasn't warmer downstream. Yeah.
In your opinion, do you think there will be full recovery for the bull trout?
Oh no, there's no way. Yeah, no. I mean, they're declining, throughout their range. Yeah, well, throughout their range. There's some populations where they're stable, and there's some populations where they're increasing. And like I mentioned, since the dam is removed, populations upriver, like bull trout, the North Fork of the Blackfoot and Montour Creek, they've been increasing, but that's just relative to how they've been for the last 20 or 30 years, not to historical levels. We're never going back there, and it's not even like a realistic restoration goal, I mean, the reality is, but they'll always be a part of hopefully they'll always be a part of this landscape. They're not going to go extinct. There's going to be fewer populations over time, but projects like this, that can affect such a huge area, are ones that are really important to think about, and especially with climate change, because just giving the ability of fish to move volitionally throughout the watershed, to find places that are more suitable, is what's going to be important.
So I'm curious, once they get to the confluence of the two rivers, how does the fish at that point kind of pick and choose?
Yeah, that's great. So the light's kind of wrong now, but all morning I've been watching it. You can actually see, you can see the difference if you stand over here, if you look over here, you can actually see the colors of the rivers are different. You can see, like on the near side here, you can see it's kind of almost like a more milky color, and then the Clark Fork side, it's actually clearer on the Clark Fork side, so it looks a little more brown. Well, fish don't use that. They don't look at color, but that's a really neat thing. Hopefully I'll remember to talk about with regard to the dam and passage. But the way fish navigate is incredible. When we know a lot about this from salmon, but our native fish here are really similar. salmon navigate, the open seas and then have that same fidelity to those natal streams or higher than we do. And the way then fish use all different tools for navigation, ranging from the magnetic fields, they can sense those, so like on a big scale, that's how they navigate. And then as they get closer, they home using primarily their sense of smell or olfaction. So here, like I said, we can see the difference in the color. Well, fish can smell that difference, and they can smell it really clearly. They can smell, so like a fish coming upriver here, if it's going to the North Fork, if it's on the Clark Fork side, on that far bank, it won't smell it. But if it's on this side, it'll smell it, even though it's been diluted hundreds of thousands of times by now. And that's an important point, because when the dam was here, what my research showed is that we needed 2 fish ladders, one to accommodate fish from the Blackfoot River and one to accommodate fish in the Clark Fork River. This is when fish passage was being, when I was evaluating different fish passage opportunities, including dam removal. So that's why one of the reasons it was very, very expensive to keep the dam here. But yeah, you can look if and especially during high flows, if you can get up on a bridge, you can see the color difference, and you can see that color difference quite a ways down. And I know, and based on I was able to, I won't get into this too much, but I was able to just to measure the concentration of barium in the water. And the barium, it occurs like at a super low amount, but it's always different between the Blackfoot and Clark Fork, regardless of the flows. So, but just by measuring the barium, I could tell just by what water source was coming into my fish trap. And based on that, I knew where fish were going. So when the flows were like this, this would be all Blackfoot water, but then at some point it would shift and I'd get Clark Fork water in the trap, and then I would know that those fish were going up the Clark Fork. Mm-hmm.
So was all that money you spent wasted trying to, mess with a dam that's no longer here? You should have just left it alone, waited for the dam to fix everything. Yeah, waited for it to fix everything. Yeah, that would have,
so was money wasted? No, it wasn't. Not at all. But yeah, but frankly, I mean, that was what I heard in the 90s of why are we going to study this? That's a waste of money. Money could be used to do what we already know is going to work, which is to restore habitat upstream. Let's put that money on the ground. Let's not do research. We heard that a lot.
Tell me why it wasn't wasted. Be more specific. What benefits can we point to now that indicate that money wasn't wasted?
Well, just to be clear, what do you mean? What money are you talking about?
The money that it took to get those fish from below the dam into the right river.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
there for 20 years, you're taking fish and you're moving them, mm-hmm. and it's very expensive to go. You're netting, pike, all that, and it was solely to keep some fish alive that would otherwise have been dead.
Right. Well, that, and also to inform a decision about the site in terms of a long-term solution. It would have been, in terms of money, I mean, it would have been much, much more expensive long-term to leave the dam here, to improve the dam to meet the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's standards for the dam, to provide fish passage for both the Blackfoot and Clark Fork rivers, to manage probably sediment in the reservoir, to manage northern pike. Dam removal, it would cost $100-something million. That would have been nothing compared to the long-term costs forever for those fixes, which could never approximate. Those are, engineering solutions to biological problems, and those don't work. And there's enough, in the literature now to show that this is a solution that works. So it's getting at your question, that was the best money people could have spent on this. Otherwise, you'd be spending money and wasting money for years to come. Forever, yes.
Do fish have the same capability of moving into tributary? Like where?
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, so the question was, will fish like pioneer new habitats? They move into new territories. Some do, some don't. Bull trout don't, and that's why a dam it can be so detrimental to them, because they don't stray. We call it straying. Instead of returning to their place of origin, some fish will stray. Like rainbow trout, for example. They're native to the west coast of the United States. The rainbow trout we have here, most of them came from California. They stray a lot. They have a 60 to 70% fidelity to their natal streams, right? So that means about 30% of them don't return to where they came from, but go someplace else. And that's what makes them a very good invader of new habitats. Same thing with brown trout. Their fidelity is even less. Yeah. So some fish stray, some don't. And unfortunately with bull trout, and this is one of the reasons why dams impact them more than other fish, is they don't have the capacity to do that as much.
So very likely some of this stream above will not have bull trout moving in.
Probably not. It would take a long time. Yeah. So a stream like Gold Creek, it's probably not going to get new fish. It would only get fish that hatched there. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Transplant fish there?
Would we? Probably not. And the main reason is there's other issues with Gold Creek apart from the dam here, and one of those things is the water's probably too warm for them through much of the year. So it's not suitable anymore. So it wouldn't. But we do that with many fish to reestablish populations, or to bolster populations. We do that as a conservation measure, but typically not with bull trout. Yeah. Kristen.
I was going to ask the same question, but couched in if there was a tributary that had lost most of its spawning population, that was still suitable.
Yeah.
Theoretically do it.
Yeah, exactly. But some of these, yeah, exactly. There are other issues going on.
Mostly been lost are probably the streams that we're going to lose them anyway. With
perhaps, yeah, perhaps, yeah. And some of them, yeah, this gets into a whole other issue, but it's certainly a tool that's out there, and you can always do that. But yeah. I've lost my audience. That's okay. Well, thank you all for coming.
So I think I'm supposed to talk about wildlife and how important this specific area is for wildlife. But we also have Chuck Bartlebaugh here, who's got the Be Bear Aware trailer as part of the Be Bear Aware campaign. So when I'm done, I'll let Chuck talk about his program and any questions you have for either of us then. So I'll make it quick. Like I've done this talk here before. In my opinion, the Piltsville, Bonner, Milltown, East Missoula area is probably one of the more important areas in the Missoula Valley, which is a pretty cool area when you think about it. This is the most important area for wildlife. Now they call this the Five Valleys, and if you look on a satellite map or on Google Earth and look down on the Rocky Mountains right where Missoula is, it's this huge fracture zone in the Rocky Mountains. And they call it the Five Valleys because you've got all these big, massive valley trenches all coming together and multiple river systems all coming together. So the area just in general is extremely unique. There's only a couple other places in the Rocky Mountains like that. One of them is north of Glacier Park up there in the Old Man River country. If you look in there, very similar in Alberta, same sort of thing where the Rocky Mountains has a break in it. And then as you go south, you see it again in the Bighorn Basin. The Bighorn Mountains are, and south of Yellowstone, and in that Evanston, Wyoming. That's a pretty big major break that almost separates the Rocky Mountains right there. So this spot right here, if you think about it, is just extremely, extremely unique. You've got the Mission Mountains kind of coming down here. They're part of the whole Rattlesnake Mountain Complex, that whole Gold Creek, Belmont Creek, Twin Creek, that's one mountain range coming right out of the North Country. And then you've got, you know, the Garnet Range here. Just takes off right here, Bonner Mountain, you know, and huge, extensive ridgeline taking off. Lots of country between the two rivers, the Clark Fork and the Blackfoot. And then you got the Sapphire Range starting right here too. And, you know, Hellgate Canyon, get on the other side of that, you got the Missoula Valley, which used to be pretty important, pretty unique, pretty cool spot, but, you know, we got a pretty big town there now. And if you think about these poor moose, we caught a yearling moose last week right in the middle of town, or you think about these lions that are just trying to work their way downstream, or a black bear trying to get from Rattlesnake Creek to the river. I mean, they got to go through a massive humanity there, and it just messes them up. A lot of the wildlife we get stuck in town are just that, lost in humanity. After a few months, they might develop some behaviors where they learn how to take advantage of us and start becoming city bears or city boys or city girls or city deer. So you see that happening too. But really, right here in you know, the new park and Bonner Milltown, you're smack right in the middle of a real important funnel for wildlife. You know, you have the Blackfoot River coming through this tight canyon. You got the Clark Fork River joining through this tight canyon. Big mountain range, you know, between the two of them, and then two real major mountain range complex to the north and the south. And almost all the wildlife, you know, that sort of are living in this area or moving through this area are naturally funneled right here. I couldn't tell you how many moose, you know, we've had stuck in the middle of East Missoula or the middle of Bonner, and we have to shove them in the log yard and try and direct them out the backside of the log yard. I've picked up so many black bears that have been road killed from right here, you know, down to, oh, probably Clinton, Tura. I mean, every year, every fall, we pick up 5, 6 bears. You know, a lot of them are females, and the cubs get orphaned, you know. It's just a heavy, heavy use for black bears. Heavy, heavy use for lions, heavy, heavy use for all sorts of stuff. So it's really, really unique area. And Friends of Two River, you know, figured that out just with their name. Just the rivers alone, you know, are very important for wildlife in general. You know, we already heard Dave Schmetterling talk about the bull trout and the cuts running up here. But, you know, every night, and probably just across the river, you know, we have all sorts of activity going on with wildlife. I'm sure there's, you know, a couple juvenile minks, you know, floating down in this high water, you know, going downstream. Maybe a couple are trying to go upstream to find some new territories. You got river otter, you know, trying to work their way through here. You got muskrat. You got, you know, all the animals associated with riparian areas, you know, trying to move up and down this river. Your weasels, your longtail, your shorttail, skunks, occasional pine marten, you know. So just the river corridor in its own is an important corridor. And when they were putting in all these trails, you know, it was like, oh, these will be so fun for bikers and hikers, you know. I wasn't thinking about bikers and hikers. I was thinking, okay, yeah, these trails are important. Get them in, because we need some way to funnel these moose, these deer, these elk, these lions, these grizzly bears, these black bears, you know, these moose that get stuck in this sort of big funnel, spokes of the wheel area. So I'm very happy about this trail, and I was really encouraging the highway department, you know, to make a little trail on the riprap on the other side here, because we've actually had wolves, you know, packs of wolves spotted early morning, that's about 5-6 years ago, using the old Milwaukee railroad bed, you know, where someone was, you know, about where the Bonner check station is, looked across and saw like a pack of like 6 wolves coming down, you know, toward Milltown here. These trails, this park will at least allow some passage. And a lot of folks just don't realize how important this site is. If you just look at, you know, the wildlife that are always showing up here, you know, over here on the base of Blue Mountain, you know, we got a really nice bighorn sheep herd, you know. Be nice if maybe they stayed up high and on the ridge lines, but you know, why do wildlife like it down here where we live? It's because we got so many goodies and we got flat ground to walk on, you know. So the sheep are constantly following right along the base of the ridge line, right over into the Milltown. And since that sheep herd has picked up, you know, we're starting to see satellite sheep herds, you know, to the south here. We've got a little group of sheep that have started up in Upper Miller Creek that probably came from this group. We've got a nice little herd of elk just right over here in this Crystal Creek, Bear Creek country, you know. They summer in here and they maybe winter over here on Miller Creek. We got a whole nother little elk herd, you know, right here on Bonner Mountain. You know, they winter on Tura Mountain, you know, and summer on the backside. Got an elk herd over here on the Woody Mountain side too. We got good mule deer herds, you know, that specifically winter in and around, you know, this little kind of triangular chunk of country. I call this site the spokes of the wheel, just because the way everything all connects right here. We had a lynx a few years ago up in the Swan Valley that was radio collared. And he did quite a little journey down through here. And where did he end up? Right in Jumbo, right where the new fence got put in Hellgate Canyon. And when he wanted to cross, you know, he maybe could have gotten here in the Sapphires and met a female lynx, you know, down south here and started a new family, but the fence hung him up. You know, he went back north. We had a female grizzly, Ethel. I don't know if you guys followed her at all, but she was a female grizzly that was caught up there around Swan Lake. They slapped a GPS collar on her and Google her up. She made this incredible journey. They trapped her by Swan Lake and they had to relocate her because she was an apple bear and a green grass bear. And they moved her into the South Fork of the Flathead, and she went over to the Rocky Mountain front, then came over into that Seeley Lake country, and then denned right up here in Johnson Creek, right on Wishard Ridge. You can actually see her den site. You know, if you go over to the school, you can see where she denned up there on Wishard Ridge. And she had a yearling with her. When they came out of the den, I got a call from the office up in Region 1. You know, they didn't really know she had denned up there until the collar turned back on, but they were like, "Jamie, you won't believe this, but you got a female grizzly denned right outside of Bonner, you know, not even a mile." And I was like, whoa. So I started watching her real close, and she actually came down, hit the old Milwaukee Railroad grade, and tried to come down here, you know, but it was a little scary, a little bit too much human activity. Had this trail bit in, you know, she maybe could have hooked into the trail system and boom, she'd have been in the Sapphires. But instead she crossed and she went up here on Bonner Mountain, and she spent quite a bit of time up on the whole face there. And she did try to take a little run and cross the Clark Fork upstream here. It's part of the park. But again, you know, it's hard to cross this area, you know. You got the two rivers, you got all the mountain ranges coming together, lots of creeks coming together, but you got Interstate 90 going through the middle of it, you got Highway 200 going through the middle of it, you got the railroad going through the middle of it, you got a lot of little side streets running through, and then you got a town with a, you know, urban sprawl going in every direction. That's tough to get through here. So anything, you know, that people can do to improve the passage is important, and that's why I was so excited about the park. I was really excited when the park, or when they were getting ready to tear out the dam. Remember, for a while there they were thinking about putting all the waste down there on Bandaman Flats rather than hauling it up to Anaconda. And I was really excited about that, because I figured if they, you know, put all that, you know, mud and stuff from the old tailing washout down there on Bandaman Flats, nobody would ever want to build there, and you'd have perfect linkage, you know, from this whole northern part of the Mission Mountain rattlesnake complex that comes down to I-90. There were actually two bridge spans on I-90 that just perfect passage, you know. You don't have to do anything with I-90 because there's two big bridge spans, you know, where a grizzly or a wolverine or a fisher could easily have, you know, got into the Sapphire Range. So I was a little disappointed that the golf course went in. But at least golf courses have a lot of open space, and we got good trails going through it. And so, you know, if a grizzly or a wolverine or a lynx does happen to come down, you know, out of Milltown Creek or Johnson Creek or what's that other, Marshall Creek, you know, at least they can squeak through there and get across the golf course. I guess my big point to all this is just an extremely unique area. I'm tickled pink that the park is here. Tickled pink that the trails are lining up just right. But that folks should be aware that this is going to be a real important site, not just for people, but also for wildlife. Now, Ethel couldn't get across here. She ended up going back north. Then in the fall, she came back down and she spent a great deal of time in the North Hills of Missoula. She was in that Butler, Laval, Rattlesnake Creek country. Then she did this tremendous move all the way to Coeur d'Alene and was able to cross Interstate 90 somewhere down, you know, on the other side of Wallace. Came south of I-90 and spent a great deal of time in the Bitterroot Mountains and then south of I-90. She then came out in the spring and moved through the Graves Range, came over to Missoula again, got hung up on the Missoula Valley, couldn't figure out where to go, so she headed south, went through Lolo, and just south of Lolo, there's one chunk of open space left in the whole Bitterroot Valley, and that's where the MPG Ranch is and the Cove Branch is. As you leave Lolo, there's about, on the right side, 700 yards of open space. It's the Cove Branch. It's where Lantern Ridge comes down. That's the last chunk of country an animal can get across the Bitterroot Valley anymore. She tried. She took a couple runs. And I think in her memory map, in her mind, she had remembered being over here, you know, in the Bonner area. And it, you know, you can line it up in your brain. You know, she was probably trying to cross there to hook back up here, then would get into country she knew. So this area is super important, and I'm so glad that the park is here.
So will we see a lot more wildlife through here now, do you think?
You know, yeah, there already is so much wildlife coming in here, but yeah, you're going to start to see more animal use once this trail gets established. You know, you're going to be having bobcat, lion, moose, you know, under the cover of darkness trying to squeak through here and get in the sapphires and vice
So
versa.
in general, we might not see the wildlife because they might choose to use it when we're not here.
True, yes, good point, but they're always going to be here, and we've already got a very well established Friends of Two Rivers here. We already do a lot of really great Be Bear Aware stuff, you know, so this is one of the more important areas in the Missoula Valley to really keep clean camp, you know, and the community's already doing a heck of a good job. So they're here. They're going to stay here, and this area is going to be real important into the future for them. And that's pretty much my spiel right there.
Did you see much in the way of fawns this year? We just haven't seen it, but we always see it. We're just not seeing it.
Yeah, boy, I've sure been seeing a lot of fawns. You know, I think there's some shifting, but like up the Rattlesnake, I've been seeing a gob of fawns, and then when I've been driving around, I've been seeing a lot of fawns and a lot of elk calves too. Been finding a lot of dead fawns too. You know, there's a lot of predation going on. Like when the fawning starts and the calving starts, that's when all the predators are like, yee-haw, you know, time for a little protein, and they really go into hunting mode. So just the other day, I had a report of 2 fawns just up the Rattlesnake that had been killed during the night by a lion. You know, we were thinking about closing the trail, but we actually just shifted the fawns off a ways. But it was a hard winter. A lot of the females did, you know, some of them did reabsorb the fetus because of the hard winter, but we still have a fair amount of fawns. And I've been seeing a lot of elk calves too, but the winter was hard. It was one of the harder winters, but it was also a normal winter for me compared to when I was a kid. When I was a kid, the winters were always like this. It's just we've had so many mild winters, everyone felt last winter was a hard one.
Do you know the approximate population of grizzlies in this area?
You know, they're saying they got about 1,000 in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem. So that chunk of country from here up the Blackfoot over to the Rocky Mountain front, north to Canada, and then over to the Nine Pipes and up the Mission Valley. They're trying to delist that population right now, and they've come up with a pretty good, a couple really good scientific papers where they came up with a baseline population and then plugged it into all sorts of mathematical models, and they came up with roughly 1,000 bears. But right in here, you know, we haven't had any resident grizzlies other than Ethel, you know, that spent a little bit of time here. And then we had that male shot and killed last spring up Johnson Creek. He could have been a transient moving through. He could have been a bear born to a female that lives up on Wishart Ridge. We haven't really had very many radio collared bears captured here. Upstream by Tura, we had a grizzly show up on a ranch where someone was feeding a lot of deer and a lot of elk and a lot of geese corn, cracked corn. And we had a grizzly show up. We did set traps for him, but we didn't catch him. But he was moving up and down the Clark Fork corridor from here all the way up to Drummond and using the valley heavily. But that was in the spring. In the fall, one reason we have so much black bear activity here is because of the chokecherry. You know, just massive chokecherry all along the river here. So I'm sure we've got a few resident grizzlies that, you know, haven't made themselves aware that are taking advantage of those fall chokecherries. So I would say, you know, in the rattlesnake wilderness, we know we have at least one resident female, and then more than likely a second one is running around there, and then a few males. But we have not had any grizzly, you know, trap for conflict reasons right here in Milltown or Bonner or East Missoula. But someday we will.
Wolves or grizzlies up Crystal Creek direction?
You know, a couple times, like we get a lot of really good reports on grizzlies, but we can't verify an actual grizzly until we have a video, a photo, a hair sample, or an excellent photo of a front track, or we get a visual by someone in Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, or someone that has the credentials to, you know, have the big verified mark go above their head. So I get a lot of really excellent reports of people that have seen grizzlies on this side of the Clark Fork that I haven't been able to verify. But I'm working real closely with a lot of those guys because they hunt it hard or they work it hard, and so when they call me and say they've seen a grizzly, I'm like, okay, next time, get a front track picture, or if you find a hair sample, collect it. Now we do have grizzlies living south of I-90 in that Rock Creek corridor in the John Long Mountains. We've gotten video, we've gotten verified tracks. So there's a few residents that live south of I-90. And then, and yeah, plenty of wolves. Yeah. Yeah, the wolves came back really nice, and we've got lots of wolf activity everywhere.
What's the main difference in hair samples? Is it a DNA thing, or can you tell by looking?
You know, you can, but I've had people bring in black bears, you know, and it's like, you look at it and you're like, well, that's a silver tip black bear, you know, and you look at the hair and you're like, whew, I would have called that grizzly. But if you find a rub tree and it's just covered with bear hair, and you kind of, you know, go to the side and have the light hitting it, if you see the tips that are just nice and silver tipped, you know, and you pull one off and you see the hair follicle and that's dark and then a nice silver tip, that's stereotypical grizzly. But
you could bring that, you want that hair?
Yeah, I'd love to have that hair sample if you ever find it. So you can kind of like, I think it's grizzly. But to really say it's grizzly, you have to do DNA.
And once you have the DNA, you might know more. You might know we trapped that bear 5
Oh yeah, yeah. So with the DNA, you've got genetic mapping in place. I mean, we've had that huge DNA study that went on 2014. So pretty much all the bears in the whole Northern Continental Divide ecosystem are genetically mapped, and we can keep track of lineages. So if you found a hair sample, you know, up Crystal Creek, and I got it, might take me 2 years to get the results, but they would have this little code and this genetic comparison. They're like, this is the daughter of female so-and-so from Seeley Lake. So it's almost like radio tracking. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, he thinks it's cool too.
Yeah. And Chuck, you want to?
Right, we'll keep it short. This is so much fun out here in the weather. Just kind of reminders about being safe in bear country.
Just a minute, Chuck.
Pardon?
Just a minute. You're going to be heard far more clearly on the video now.
Those that don't know me, for the past 30-some years, I've been working on bear behavior and human behavior and how they work together and how people end up getting mauled and bears get in trouble and so forth. And the biggest thing is complacency. Unless you do something irresponsible, get close and try to interact with. But complacency, letting your guard down, and we recommend every now and then stopping, listening, smelling, and using your voice to call out and looking the area over really well. Like today, the water is running deep and fast. There's a lot of places where bears are busy along creeks and streams where they're not going to hear you coming up, so you got to be extra cautious, call out really loud. I prefer making monotone sounds that are non-threatening to a bear, like how you doing, coming down the trail, human voices, and projecting it and stopping at thick brush and looking the area over. That would eliminate about a third of all bear maulings. The other thing that would eliminate the rest is not feeding, not approaching, not trying to interact in. For those of you who don't know, but for the past 20 years we've had a problem of people trying to kiss bears on the lips, believe it or not. It's a bad idea. In a similar situation, a man just died when he tried to kiss his pet rattlesnake on the lips. It didn't work. So, and carrying bear spray, and I recommend carrying something that will spray at least 7 seconds and will go at least 30 feet. And not all bear sprays are the same. Matter of fact, each product is different. The only one I know of to follow the recommendations of the University of Montana is counter assault. 7+ seconds, 30+ feet, well atomized, mixed before it goes in the can, and far more reliable, in my opinion, than some of the other ones. Some of the other ones only spray 4 seconds, sufficient for one bear in one instance, but I want reserve for the hike out. I want to know if I have a mating pair or juveniles running together, I can spray both bears, not just one bear. And people have been mauled when they did not have enough bear spray to spray all the bears. And the latest trend, I don't recommend it, is short burst. There's no such thing as a short burst ever being tested. And the short burst doesn't deliver a 70-mile-an-hour powerful expanding cloud. And it doesn't even have a well-atomized cloud that's going out to the bear. I believe in spraying the bear. Does everyone here know how to use bear spray? I'll tell you how people have been mauled using bear spray incorrectly. People without firearm experience do not hold the can firmly. They press down on the trigger and it tilts up in the air and they spray over top of the bear. And some people do even worse. They turn the other way and try not to be facing the bear or the cloud coming out. So 2 hands is really good, and downward. It billows up, it does not billow down towards the front of the bear, and continues spraying until the bear diverts its charge. And that recommendation would hold true if the bear is 60 feet away, charging. You spray to a point 30 feet out in front of you, and then the bear runs into the cloud. Remember, bears can run up to 30 miles an hour. It varies from scenario to scenario, but in a high-powered aggressive charge, that bear will meet the cloud about 30 feet out, run into the cloud, and divert its charge. If the bear is closer, like at a berry patch, 30 feet away, straight at the front of the bear and continue spraying till the bear diverts its charge. And if it doesn't divert its charge, prepare to go to the ground with it if it makes contact. 15 feet's not that uncommon, coming out of a daybed next to the trail. It's going to be on you. You are going to have contact in 90% of the cases. Spray towards the bear, spin around, go to the ground, and maybe even spray some more up and above you and contaminate the whole area with the cloud of bear spray. You can handle it. We have little tiny noses. They have big noses. And that bear may swat you, bite you, but it will run off sooner than later. And then the final scenario is an immediate contact charge. You're hiking along a hedge, or you're hiking along some bushes, or you're off trail, you're working or hunting. That bear may come out of a day bed and hit you without any warning at all. When you go to the ground, try to get your bear spray out, just start spraying the whole area. Don't worry about the face, don't worry about the eyes of the bear, just spray. And that happened to a guy up in Shoto who was bird hunting. And he said the bear stopped, held his ankle in its mouth, then dropped his ankle, shook its head, and ran off. So that's a successful deployment of bear spray. You're going to be miserable, your eyes are going to burn, and your nose is going to feel funny, and your throat's going to be sore and stressed. But that will eliminate the aggressiveness in that bear. Does everyone here know how bear spray works? It has nothing to do with pain. It has to do with the irritant in the capsaicin-related capsinoids. And that causes a inflammation of the molecules in different parts of the nose, which swell up and reduces the ability to breathe through the nose, through the throat. Therefore, it can't get oxygen to the lungs and heart. And that bear has inability to fight at that point, can't woof out at you, can't exhale, inhale, snot is going everywhere, its mouth is full of foam, its ears are ringing, and its eyes are flashing. That bear has lost all of its main tools it uses to be aggressive. Literally shuts it down, and that stops the bear. And in cases where bears have been encountered right afterwards, not necessarily in a hostile situation, the bear was not aggressive, where it could be observed. Now, there was one case 2 years ago where a guy hiking got mauled by the same bear twice. That was a coincidence. I interviewed him. The bear that mauled him, that he sprayed, but he sprayed too late, and the bear made contact. Once the bear felt the ingredients, she ran up a mountainside with her cubs. He went downwards on the trail. It got steep. She came down and ran right into him. It was really just a coincidence what happened for the second mauling. She didn't seek him out. She didn't try to catch up to him or something like that.
Did bear spray kill the bear?
No. Never kills the bear, and doesn't kill you either. And I've been sprayed lots of times, both by myself, by school students, mainly college students. And it hasn't killed me. Makes me a little weird, but no, it's fine.
What about if you tend to have asthma attacks from things like this?
Well, I'll tell you my case. This is inert training canister. Is anyone here asthmatic?
Yeah.
Any breathing? You're asthmatic?
Yeah, and I don't have my inhaler with me today either.
Even the inert canister can cause an asthmatic. I've sent 2 people to the hospital. Didn't like that. Didn't know they were asthmatic. And this does not have any caustic chemicals in it, but it does have propellant and some stuff that has like an industrial taste to it. So
I think if a person was asthmatic, it does feel like you can't breathe very well if you get the full blast. So I've been sprayed so many times I put holes in all my cans and don't use even the inert training canisters in most cases. So.
How do those things hold up in your car?
Pardon?
What if you leave one of those in your car for the
Leave it on the dash.
Is it going to work the next year?
Put it in a storage container.
Yeah.
And stuff, a proper storage container.
I've tried to explode them in junkyards with them on the dash, and we've been unsuccessful every time. However, it will do it. I use a little cooler if it's a 100-degree type August day. I put it in the cooler, no ice. So it's shaded, so it's not getting direct sunlight. That's the important.
About it not working if it's been in your car for the summer?
It's always worked fine.
Yeah,
but
you lose the seal.
Yeah, you could lose the seal and the propellant comes out. But you can still feel like stuff's in the can, but what pushes it out the nozzle has been reduced. So you don't want a can that's overheated. NBC Montana had me demonstrate bear spray. And then unannounced to me, they handed me another can. They said, I'll use this can and show us how it works. It was counter assault again. And I said, why do you want me to demonstrate with this? And they said it expired 7 years ago. And that meant it was 11 years old, and it sprayed just fine. It did a really good spray, but they had it properly stored at all times.
Doesn't lose potency.
Pardon?
Doesn't lose potency, or
Oh,
It doesn't seem to.
not the capsaicin related capsinoids.
If anyone has expired bear spray that you want to get rid of, I take that. And I'm still using expired cans, 15, 20 years old, for management. It still works quite effective.
If you have an old can, make sure you carry that one and your friend carries the new can.
But I should add, I was joking about leaving it on the dash. It's where you don't want to leave it, and I've certainly heard reports of it blowing up. And you do not want a car full of bear spray.
And we had
The 3 times I've been sprayed have all been where I've had the can kind of back behind the seat. Someone who's got a little bit longer legs than I do rams it back and breaks the can. That's happened to me 3 times now. So yeah.
we had one leak
Christy
in
was
our house, and it was just right. I thought it would have leaked here, but there was a little nick of a dent that eventually it worked its way through, and that was miserable in the basement of our house. So we get these foam-filled plastic containers where if they leak, whether you have this container in your house or your car, if the spray leaks, the propellant comes out through the foam and the capsicum gets caught in the foam, and
Treat it like your last can of cold beer.
yeah.
Special
Then I'll take it out and put it on in my holder when I'm hiking. But when it's in the car or in the house, it's in a storage container.
This is a little confusing, but it's a special request. Always call it bear spray. Never ever call it pepper spray. Pepper spray is against the law to use on bears. Bear spray is legal to use on bear and works. No one really knows what goes in pepper spray or what's in a can of pepper spray, so you don't know if it's going to work, and you also don't know if it's going to harm you. We only know that bear spray will not harm you because it's used on an animal, therefore it's required by law to be tested to make sure it doesn't hurt the animal. Now, if you heard what I just said correctly.
But unless I'm mistaken, Jamie's father was involved with testing of bear spray at the University of Montana.
He was key involved. And bear behavior, yeah.
So and they were able to test a variety of things, Why not use tear gas? So
mace.
And apparently the thing that worked best was this
Capsaicin-related capsinoid in consistent quantities without a lot of oleoresin capsicum, which is the oil that clogs the nozzle and dilutes the active ingredient of capsaicin-related capsinoid. If you look on a pepper spray can, they promote more OC, only because they can put higher percentage on a personal defense spray can, but that's what makes it not work.
The ingredient that worked second best was skunk in the lab, but you can imagine why they haven't marketed that one.
If you have one of those cans explode because it's sitting on a black seat or on the dash, and if it explodes, it doesn't just send the spray. The thing will turn into shot.
Yep,
It can actually cut your, and it's very caustic. It'll wipe it'll raise hell with your car, the console of your car.
You don't want them on airplanes at all.
That's right.
And if you're on a fixed wing like an otter, a beaver, or something, flying, most of the pilots want to know if you've got a can of bear spray, and they will then have you tape it on the outside of the plane. They don't want it inside the plane because it can wreck.
What are the options for these people who fly in from out of state want to go backpacking? They want to pick up some bear spray.
They shouldn't forget it. They should ship it home by mail. If it has really expanded and been seriously overfilled or overheated, this will pop out. The bottom will pop out and it won't be able to stand up like that. Or the nozzle will feel oily, and when you rub your eyes, you'll know there's something wrong.
What about freezing them?
I really don't think that's good for it. I really think it could cause the seams to weaken and the propellant to come out.
I put a can into the freezer just, to test it. I forgot about it. And about 2 months later, I found it, and it had done exactly what Chuck said. It had expanded, and the seals were completely broken and I ruined the can, but that was in a deep freeze. I've had it freeze overnight, get cold overnight, in some pretty good hunting conditions, and the can didn't seem to get damaged. So what I did was extreme.
And bear spray is something you now carry year round. The only one that I know that still sprays in the cold is counter assault. The other ones freeze up and drizzle out of the can. They don't even spray. This will be reduced from 30 plus feet to about 15 plus feet. And that makes a big difference with the charging bear. So I recommend keeping it indoors at night or in a tent or a motel room or cabin or something like that. Taking it out of your holster and putting it in a warm, insulated side pocket, which is going to delay your ability to pull it out and deploy it. But keeping it warm at all costs under winter conditions. Or cold, lower than 40 degrees, I would be very cautious.
Another option that I use is I'll have my bear spray, I almost always have it on a chest holster, because I know exactly where it is, I know exactly what it takes to get to it, and that can be under a coat in winter, and it's still accessible, but it's not going to ever even get near freezing.
And in closing, it varies from 4 seconds to 9 seconds, depending on the product you buy. I wouldn't buy less than 7 seconds. And it goes from 12 feet to 35 feet. I wouldn't purchase anything below 30 feet. You need that distance for the bear to respond in time to divert its charge. And that 4-step scenario I gave you is from incidents that actually happened. It's not something I just thinking through the process. They have actually happened and had the different kinds of outcomes.
And it's called bear spray, but it's very effective on lions. I know a lot of people that have used it in kind of strange encounters with lions. Moose, you know, a cow moose that's mad that you're too close to the calf. Elk, you know, guard her calf. These randy bucks, a vicious dog, you know, so it's a good tool. It's for bears, but it's a good tool. It's something we should carry with you all the time. I've even heard of people, you know, even though it's illegal, giving it a dash on a grouse, wringing the neck and having dinner. So
That's not legal, Jim.
It's not legal.
It's already
I already said that. But it's a tool that people should have on their belts, just like a knife and matches.
But Chuck, if you had the bear spray here and a 375 H&H Magnum there, and you had a charging grizzly coming from the Clark Fort, which of the two would you grab?
I would use bear spray without a doubt. Because the firearm may anger the bear even if you've mortally wounded it. It's going to be more combative. With bear spray, it loses its ability to be combative. So you still have a fighting bear unless you're lucky and had a drop break the back of the bear or something like that. And what bear hunters have told me, if they were being charged, they would prefer bear spray. If they had a pistol, they would take out the shoulder of the bear, knock it down, and then they continue shooting till it couldn't keep coming at them anymore and died.
So what does research show?
Shoot out the shoulder. Well, between the two, there is no research between the two, but for hunters, what they have found is taking out a shoulder, dropping that bear down, and then continually shooting was the best way to do it.
And if it's a grizzly, you probably don't want to shoot it, so bear spray would be best. And use the rifle as a backup, perhaps?
Well, rifle is just bulky to use in a close counter situation. But remember, what you're trying to do is to stop that bear and slow it down. See this brush here? Everyone thinks about in the shooting process that they have a target where they can shoot under the chin or the lung or something like that. A charging grizzly is zigzagging maybe. It's coming through thick brush. You don't have that little tiny target to try to direct a shot for. Bear spray comes out in a powerful expanding cloud. And to go with that, the way I would use bear spray if I had to use it again, I've had to use it in the past, I would spray the moment my hand hit the trigger in the holster, and as I brought it up to where the bear was, I would be spraying a path that bear would have to follow. And I don't worry about saving or rationing my bear spray. I'm going to use every dollar of it I can.
If there was a light breeze coming at you, does that...
You wouldn't even know it. I got to tell you, if you had having had 2 grizzly bears come at me in a full-blown charge, I didn't know even if I was on planet Earth anymore. I mean, all that stuff is out of your mind. Your adrenaline's running. Afterwards, you're going to feel it. Afterwards, you're going to have a problem with it, but it won't be that bad unless you're an asthmatic or someone with some other lung type problem. Matter of fact, it clears out your nostrils really well.
Well, when my young German Shepherd put a tiny pinhole puncture in one of them.
There is no such thing as a tiny pinhole. If there's a hole, there's a hole. What happened when that happened?
It didn't.
Was it in the house?
Yeah, because I had it by my bedside when I wasn't. And it took me a while to see the dent in it. And when I removed that, the coughing stopped.
There you go.
You're lucky.
You go.
When ours leaked, it was in a cupboard, a wooden cupboard down in the basement, one of those just cheap pressed wood storage cabinets. And it leaked in there, and the dogs didn't want to stay in the house. Bert didn't know what was going on. He'd let the dogs out, and then he'd let them back in, and they'd turn right around and want to go back out. Then he finally smelled it, and then he called the fire department, and then they finally found the bear spray in there. We threw the cupboard away. It was an old piece of a shag rug in the basement. We threw that away. We cleaned, we did everything, and from that point on till we moved out of that house, I'd go down in the basement, and I couldn't even smell it, but I would start coughing. It's very irritating for somebody like me.
I used to tell parents it was good on children, but I started getting phone calls saying the second time I tried to use it on the kids, they were holding the can.
You know, the one thing that I should say about bear spray is, you know, if you're just generally are hiking and going on little trips with the dog, you know, you don't have to go to this extreme. But if you honestly spend a great deal of time in the backcountry, you know, going on backpack trips, or if you go hunting a lot, it really helps to purchase a can of the inert as well. And just like any new toy that you get, you know, become super familiar with it, just play it with it. You know, that first week you have it, just, you know, keep it right by the television while you're watching TV and just get real familiar with the feeling of it. And if you have a can of inert, you know, you can actually spray it so you know how it works. And the more you do that, the quicker your mind or your body will just react when you do have to use it. I've been carrying it for so long, you know, it almost feels like second nature to a gun. You know, it feels very natural in my hand. And I would say while you were hiking, you know, if you're going into a kind of a little hidey hole, you know, where the brush gets a little thick on either side of the trail, yeah, just pull it out of your pocket, keep it in your hand, and start feeling really comfortable with it. And it'll pay off later.
We had one of those things go off. We were going down some rapids on the Smith River. Somebody had moved our bear spray, so we didn't know where it was. And Jan hit the can accidentally and went off right in her face. And it took me a minute to find, you know, way
right
to
in the
get
middle of
to
a
the shore.
real rough rapid.
The only thing we could think to do was stick her head in the water.
Yeah.
And I guess, is there any other way to
And
deal
covering
with
milk helps too.
milk?
And you can buy commercially made plastic containers that are lined with foam and have the release things. They only cost, I think the last time I bought them was $25, $30. They're well worth it, because you probably don't need it when you're in the raft itself, but you know, it's hard for a bear to charge you when it's swimming, but when you get to camp, you can get it out of the container. But it's really helpful for carrying in your vehicle and just all that stuff, because then you could throw it behind your seat and it wouldn't matter if somebody long-legged pushed the seat back and hit that plastic thing, it would just bounce right off of it.
So I'd like to add, there is a real tie of Missoula to bear spray. Not only did Chuck's uncle do the testing that proved that this was an effective way to repel grizzlies, but the Missoula Technology and Development Center Forest Service office in town was asked, how can we allow people to carry bear spray without exposing people in cars to the risk of dying when it goes off. It's somebody driving 60 miles an hour. And so the engineers did a variety of things. They put it in sort of hermetically sealed bombs, and they'd see, well, how would this big, heavy, very carefully sealed thing work? And somehow they figured out that it'd be just better to let the propellant loose and catch the active ingredient in open cell furniture foam. So the materials to protect yourself with bear spray cost almost nothing. And it's what good investment. You know?
So remember the 4 scenarios, but remember just this. You need to hold the can firmly so it does not tilt and spray over top of the bear. You need your thumb in front of the curled up lip so it comes off spontaneously. You stretch your arm out in front of you and you holler, "Get out of here!" and spray directly towards that bear until it stops its charge and changes direction. Then you can let go of the trigger. If you just remember that, you're going to do the best you can in every scenario that you have with a charging bear.
What if, by chance, you encounter a charging bear and you forgot your bear spray?
Go to the ground and play dead. And I'm going to say something that Jamie probably won't fully agree with, but and it's still up in the air, and I'm going by the seat of my pants right now. Almost all bears that suddenly charge, I think they're doing a defensive charge. They're scared. They're concerned about cubs or food sources or whatever it might be. Become a non-threat to that bear. Go to the ground, protect the back of your neck, and that includes black bears. There have been 5 people who have tried to fight off black bears and gave up, and the bear stopped mauling them and walked away. So,
Yep, you don't want to fight.
Jamie is the only person in this room that could identify a charging black from a charging grizzly. So I think asking people to identify
at that
a charging bear is almost a poor idea.
Yeah, I think with either, you do not, it's so hard to not do that, but you don't want to fight, you want to play dead, and then anymore they don't want you to roll up into a ball like they recommended.
Lay
they
flat.
do want you to protect your face and your neck, but keep straight and tight so that when the bear's rolling you around, you always roll further and end up with your face down. But yeah, you don't want to fight them, unless it looks like they're escalating, beyond just punishing you for being too close to the cubs. Then they do make some recommendations on fighting.
Now, if you have a pack on your back, should you flatten out and leave the
Let that
pack back there
pack
to protect
cover your
yourself,
back.
or get it off and give it to the bear to distract it?
More and more bears have torn apart packs and not hurt the person.
In the old days, they used to say, take your pack off and throw it out there, but now they recommend that you
Just
keep it
keep it
on
on
you.
for protection.
In Yellowstone, where the senior citizen couple was charged from 100 yards away by a grizzly bear with cubs, he stood to fight the bear and was taken down and quickly disabled. She panicked and ran and tripped and landed face down. The bear ran over, picked up the backpack with her still wearing it, and then dropped it down and ran off, never touching her. And I think if he had not fought back and ended up on his back, he would have not gotten bitten in the thigh and had his artery opened up. And think about it, bears don't kill people. They die from injuries or being fed upon. And fed upon's almost never. I don't know if there ever is a real case of that. But a bear hits you in the chest with its claws, it's going to do a lot of damage. It hits you here, it's going to be fatal damage. And that is just where the paw lands and the claws land. It's not where the bear's trying to go to, like a lion in Africa that suffocates its prey. It doesn't do that. It wants to disable you and remove the threat. And the other thing about all this is you're never going to need your bear spray. I can almost guarantee that if you go and buy a bear spray tomorrow, you definitely will not ever need it. And that's almost a guarantee. But if you don't buy your bear spray tomorrow, if I know my luck,
And we're all talking about the worst case scenario. And, you know, if the mind has never been there before and thought about it, then you won't know how to react should in that very rare occasion you might need it. So it's good to think it all over so that you're ready and mentally prepared should you be walking down the trail with your dog and see a female over here, 2 cubs over there, and her ears lay back and she comes at you.
And this has happened in Yellowstone and Glacier and a lot in Banff and Jasper. Bears are now wanting to socialize, and they're not food conditioned, but they're conditioned to the interaction and entertainment of people. And that's a whole new subject that's going to take a lot of research. And we got materials up here for everyone around the tables here. We have more of these if you want to go to our PowerPoint or videos on bear spray demonstrations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you guys, what is this?
Whoa.
Yes. It is an osprey. Woohoo. So this is another bird, and this is a very hungry osprey. It hasn't eaten for a while. Yeah. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about osprey and why they're so important and special for waterways like this. And we'll tell you we've been studying ospreys for about, I've been studying ospreys for about 40 years, but we've been studying them for about 15 years here as part of the Superfund project here. So what do ospreys eat? Fish. What else? What else do they eat?
Nothing else.
Oh, yeah, all right.
They're the only birds who eat only fish.
That's right. These guys are incredibly specialized on fish, and we're going to have, this is a bird that was hit by a car up near Warm Springs, and I popped out and got her, and so we stuffed her so you can, we'll have her and the skeleton. And so you can come up later and look, there's a lot of really specialized adaptations that ospreys have for catching fish. They're really remarkable. So ospreys, I say you just add water and you've got ospreys. And that's pretty much true around the world. Kate mentioned that peregrine falcons occur just about everywhere. Ospreys occur on every single continent except Antarctic. So they're found all over the world, closely associated with clean waters and streams and rivers. We're really fortunate now to have lots of ospreys here. We kind of take them for granted, right? We're lucky to see ospreys all up and down western Montana. But just as Kate was saying, it didn't used to be this way. Back in 1980, there was maybe only about 2 or 3 osprey nests, say up in Flathead Lake in western Montana. So just like the peregrines and bald eagles, ospreys almost went extinct in Montana, and certainly in North America they were crashing because of DDT and pesticides. We've kind of taken care of that problem in North America. DDT was banned in 1972 in this country, and a lot of these birds are rebounded incredibly quickly. Oh, you know what? I'm going to borrow Larry's table here.
Is that okay, Larry?
There we go. So afterwards, if any of you want to come up and look at Doris, as we call her, and the hungry osprey, there's a lot of really cool things to see about her. But we've been studying ospreys before, during, and after the Milltown Dam came out. We've been using ospreys to tell us about the health of the river. And the reason is that these guys eat big fish, and those big fish eat smaller fish generally, and those small fish eat smaller fish, etc. Maybe caddisflies and so forth. And so the heavy metals and the toxins that were the reason that the dam was taken out, the things that we were worried about, the big 5 heavy metals are arsenic, cadmium, copper, zinc, and lead. And there was so much arsenic, for example, that the folks in Bonner and Milltown couldn't drink the water. So that was one of the motivations for the dam being removed. And so every year and about a month from now, when the osprey chicks are about yay big, we do alien abductions we go with the bucket truck and we go up to nests and we take out the little chicks. We take them down to the ground really quickly. The parents aren't too happy, but we go really fast. We take very small blood samples and feather samples and put the chicks right back up in the nest as fast as we can, looking split. And then we're able to analyze the blood and the feather samples for heavy metals and other toxins. And so soon, we're monitoring about 200 osprey nests in the area, and we've got osprey nests in the Clark Fork and Bitterroot and Blackfoot, and we go all the way up to close to Butte. So we're sampling ospreys all along. Now,
What are you finding?
what's that? I'll tell you what we're finding, which is very, very encouraging. But we only grab the babies and take their blood. We can catch the adults. It's a little harder, but we know how to do it. But we don't catch the adults to sample blood and mercury. Why would we maybe be interested only in the babies? Okay, they've only been fed straight out of the river. How about the adults?
Well, they migrate.
Right. The adults migrate, so they only spend about 6-7 months a year here, and an adult osprey might spend more than half of its life down in Mexico, Peru, Central America, somewhere else. So they might be getting lots of poisons somewhere else. So if I took a feather from this bird or a little blood sample and it had junk in it, I wouldn't be able to say that it picked it up in the Clark Fork. It might have got it in Peru, okay? But if you think about those baby chicks, all of that biomass, that entire chick was grown from fish within a mile or two of that nest. And so the chicks, the blood and the feather samples from those chicks, it's incredibly valuable, and it allows us to make a super high resolution map, a picture of how healthy the river is. And what I'm really happy to report, what's really exciting is what we're looking at now is not only incredibly powerful to see the Blackfoot and Clark Fork coming together here and the fish are starting to move back and forth, but this project, the restoration all the way up, has really, really worked well. We're finding that the levels of heavy metals in the ospreys and the osprey chicks is really, really low. So the big five heavy metals, the birds are in really, really good shape. And in fact, it's a little ironic, the chicks, the ospreys, the place that we find that they're the healthiest with the lowest levels of heavy metals is at ground zero right up near Warm Springs. Okay, so kind of where all the crud originally came in the river, right? That's really clean now. We have found there is one big problem that the ospreys are telling us about. The heavy metals associated with the copper mining, those are in good shape, but we're finding incredibly high levels of mercury in ospreys. And that's not from the copper mining stuff, it's mainly from old gold mines. A lot of the mercury in the Clark Fork right here is coming out of Flint Creek and from some of the old gold mines up behind Phillipsburg. And to give you an idea of how high these levels of mercury are, for humans, the upper level for mercury has been set about 5 parts per billion. If you think about it, that's not a lot. Like five parts of mercury in a billion parts of blood, that's hardly anything, and yet that's really, really toxic. We're finding the osprey chicks right around here have 500 or 5,000 parts per billion. So if any of us, if you went to St. Pat's with that level of mercury that the ospreys around here have, it would be code red. The doctors would be freaking out because that's way too much mercury. But I'm happy to say that the ospreys have helped the ospreys that nest right here have helped identify this problem, and the state is actually starting to do some pretty serious work about mercury, and so people are starting to get on this. Let me also say that over the years, while we've been doing this research, we've taken a lot of people out with us to help to see osprey chicks up close and personal. And since we've started there's been over 50,000 people that have come down to the river and learned about the river from here to Butte. So this project has really been exciting. We've been able to get a ton of people out learning about the river and clean water and ospreys and other critters that are up and down the river. I'd also like to just give a shout out. Those of you who are here this morning heard how many people and how many groups have made all of this happen. For us, I'd like to say the Natural Resources Damage Program. Doug Martin was here this morning speaking, but they've supported and funded the educational part of this to help get 50,000 people out to the river for the last 10 years. So the state, the Department of Justice, the Natural Resource Damage Program has been huge in helping make this happen. Delete, did I forget anything? Oh, we've got to look at our Osprey t-shirts. Come on, you guys. Woohoo.
Come on, kids. Come here.
This is Stanley. Was Stanley the nearest osprey nest from here? Well, if you look up there, you'll see a platform. Up there, there's no osprey nesting on it. Think good thoughts, and maybe in a year or two there might be an osprey nesting there. There used to be an osprey nest just down here below the dam. The nearest nest is down near Riverside Health Center and the Missoula College. And that is, Iris is the female. She's about 20 years old. And her new mate is Lewis, named after Lewis Adams, the Salish elder, who died a few years ago on April 25th. And about an hour after Lewis Adams died, a new young male showed up and paired with Iris. So Lewis and Iris now have 2 chicks, very cold and wet chicks today, but they got fed a little while ago. We have a camera on it, so you can go and look at our camera that we operate. But Stanley was her mate before, and he was missing a feather, so we could always tell who he was. He never returned. We figured he was an old osprey, and he died a few years ago. But
Couple of things.
Yeah.
Can I add?
Yeah.
So both Kate and Eric talked about the mercury. Kate actually said biomagnification. The one component that was potentially hard for you guys to get is that when we get these heavy metals in our systems, we can't get rid of them, right? So whatever they get in their system stays in their system. And so if their food chain, and that's not an osprey, if the food chain goes from the producer all the way to the apex predator, right? What happens when you're looking at the nasty stuff, the heavy metals and mercury, is that if the producer has a little bit of it, so think about these units, these dots as one unit of it, as you go up the food chain, since we can't get them out of our system, that top predator has a ton of it, and that is the problem, right? If we could get it out, run fast, release the calories, whatever, excrete whatever, it would be fine, but we can't, and so that's the problem with heavy metals. The other thing I wanted to add, and I think that's okay, is which Eric mentioned that we have programs, educational programs, where people can see up close the osprey chicks. We have one on July 12th, and if you have any interest in coming and seeing osprey up close, osprey chicks up close, then you guys should get in touch with us. Google it online. There's a Facebook page also, and you can find information and get in touch with us.
What are the effects of mercury? I mean, what happens to them when they're all
mercury is a really potent neurotoxin. It's really bad for developing vertebrates. In humans, it's called Minamata disease. After a Japanese town, a fishing town, Minamata, where people were eating fish, and there was a plastics factory that was dumping mercury into the ocean, and it's hideous. What we're finding is that nests in high mercury areas, about half of the osprey eggs die and do not hatch. So if you think about it, it's kind of like if half of women who were pregnant lost their babies, it's a big deal. So in these areas of heavy mercury, we're finding about half the eggs are not hatching.
Do you see behavior differences in the ones
That's
that
a
do
little
hatch?
hard to tell. So I've been wondering, what an osprey with that is not too bright, looks like, and maybe it just can't catch fish as well. And so we've been kind of wondering about Lewis a little bit the last few days because he's not bringing in the fish. And my wife Ann keeps saying, I think he's got a little bit too much mercury. But yeah, good question. Ospreys are incredibly powerful flyers. They can lift off of the water when they dive in. They might have like a couple, 2, 3, 4 pounds of water, you know, in their feathers, and they might be lifting out a big sucker that might weigh 5, 6 pounds. They can lift off the water sometimes with probably 3 to 4 times their body weight in water and fish. The first thing they do is when they get out of the water is they shake like a wet dog and shake all the water off. But come up later and you can look at the skeleton. This is the keel, the sternum. So we don't really have a sternum, but this is called the keel bone on the sternum of an osprey. This is where their pectoral muscles attach, and the pectoral muscles are what allow them to do this. And about 1/3 of an osprey's body weight is one muscle, its pectoral muscle, and that's what allows them to get off the water with these humongous big fish. So, and Julie can talk about a lot of the other cool adaptations that ospreys have if you want. Look at these honking big talons, feet. They're really good at, they're designed well to catch fish. All right.
Just one more question. When they go down to Mexico, like Baja, there's no fresh water. Are they getting all their water from fish?
Yeah, that's a good question. So ospreys that spend the winter on the ocean, they're getting fish with and getting water right out of the fish. Any other questions? All right, thanks very much, you guys. Oops.
No, I'm just leaving you over there.